Welcome to Learning Life Skills Together. This is our weekly community Zoom meeting where our guests help us to go deeper into the 4 life skills and open up a huge array of chances to practice them. Welcome, everyone, to our weekly Zoom meeting number 35 with Todd Pride. And so, as always, we're going to start with a practice to help bring ourselves here and to help maybe put us into a little more mode where we can listen, think, respond, however it might be for you. So I want to try one more time with the stop practice. And so the S in stop stands for stop. So I would suggest that you stop. If you're in a place and in a way where you could close your eyes, that sometimes helps make a little pause in the way things are. So just stopping, however that works for you. And the T is to take a breath and take a step back. So just taking a deep breath, however that works for you. And taking a step back. So we don't need to be rushing forward. So much of our day is spent just in that forward rush. And to pause for a moment, let ourselves become a little more still, maybe, and be ready to observe, which is the O in stop. So just notice what it's like for you right now. Maybe how it feels in your body. Do you still feel that forward motion? Do you feel the tension in your muscles that comes from all that forward motion? Maybe you could really step back. Let that go a little bit. And just be aware of how it is with you. That's the observe part. And the P is to proceed. And so maybe we're in a place where we can proceed. And so I have with me today Todd Pride, who's going to talk a little bit about himself and the things he's involved in. But first, I want to ask him how this practice was for him, because we're recorded and I can't ask our audience. So, Todd, how was this for you to stop?
It was wonderful, Don. My stopping was lifting my head from the screen here and looking straight out the window and looking at the hillside out of my home office window, which is a hillside of ferns
Ooh,
and a number of beautiful plants that I've continued to expand that have incredible colors of burgundy, of green and yellow and orange and purple.
mm,
So, yeah, when you said close your eyes, I tried to open them wider.
okay. That's the deal. It's always your choice.
Yeah, but
So,
and
yeah.
I think for anyone to stop, and again, I could be in a different place. Fortunately, my office, whether it's inside or outside, is in nature, which we'll talk about. But I think the opportunity to stop and think about beautiful environments where one may want to be in the very near future.
Yeah, and so that's what we're all about today. So, um, maybe you could start by talking about the choice that you made to really pursue being in the out of doors as your career, because you made a shift deliberately to do that.
Yeah, I mean, a bit of a shift, I'm going to say, Don, to move into the outdoors, but to take my work from what I was doing for probably a little over half of 24 years working at finance, and that last half of the time was was working with a number of companies and organizations that were providing financial services to low to middle income consumers and families.
Mm,
So I've had, I guess, at the point where I am in my life in my 50s, to be honest with myself, I've had the bug of helping people my entire life.
yeah,
Um, and I
it's a good
think, that
bug.
comes, yeah, it's a bug. No pun intended. I've not been able to get rid of that bug. Um, don't think I want to or I should, but yeah, it was
Yeah.
a pretty big shift working in finance, but a pretty easy shift to, as I spent some time, for probably 2 years, after running a few companies and wanting to do something a little bit different, but jumped over on that, help and educate side of the fence in the outdoors. I mean, I was fortunate at a very young age with, my dad in particular, who was an outdoors person, and I will say the selfishness of him, and I am a dad myself. Actually, I'm a stepdad, but I joke with my wife, my partner, that sometimes it's important for kids to follow what their parents do in terms of their own interest, as opposed to following the kids exactly where they actually want to go, because sometimes they don't know where they want to go.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah.
Yeah. So my work and my passion, has taken me from my dad's obsession with fishing and hunting and being in the outdoors. And, I have come to that as an adult. And if my dad wasn't, he wasn't a selfish person at all. Some people who knew him may say differently, but my dad wanted to fish and he wanted to hunt. And that's where we spent a lot of our weekends, here in the Philadelphia area, and then in upstate New York and Maine, is, going where dad wanted to go. Obviously he was, teaching us how to fish and teaching us how to be in the outdoors, and that has now become my lifelong passion. So
Mm,
if he followed, and I'm not saying this is the path for everybody, but just something to think about. If it was just him wanting to, just follow me where I may have wanted to go, whether or not it was just football or basketball or something else, and I don't know if I would have arrived at this place.
mm,
And not personally and selfishly. I mean, as I'll talk about, I mean, myself and my small team, we're now over 21,000 students. We've introduced and trained into fishing in the outdoors. So not
wow.
just, it's not about me, it's, about helping others to see what I saw many years ago.
Yeah. So that's a lot of people. That's a lot of kids. Big accomplishment. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that organization.
Yeah, so I formed the Mid-Atlantic Youth Anglers and Outdoors Partners in 2008. Actually, we started out as the Philly Youth Anglers and Outdoors program, and then very quickly, within 2 years, we were getting a lot of interest from schools and after-school programs in New Jersey and in Maryland through some relationships I had, and ended up taking actually a number of Philly school groups and others to New Jersey to fish because it was
Hmm,
just closer to where their locations were. So
right.
it just made sense to expand our branding to a Mid-Atlantic geography and name. So that started in 2008, actually in September 2008, and again now in our 16th year, and probably 60-70% on a year to year basis is focused on fishing training, and then the other part of that we've integrated birding, and then we do a little bit of other wildlife training and
Hmm.
conservation education at the core of all of that.
Yeah, yeah. And so the birding and fishing are two of the things that we're sort of focusing on right now in learning life skills together because they are activities that we can all do and all across the lifespan, right? Um, and we can do them together or alone. They're really flexible things that actually are good for us. They're being out of doors, we know improves how we're thinking, how we're working. It improves our emotional balance just to be outside, just to be outside for 10 minutes. You can notice a shift. And so we're really, emphasizing getting outside and emphasizing that there are things to do besides just stand outside and let the out of doors work on you, So um, maybe you could talk a little bit about fishing and a little bit about, sort of how you got into it and how you got deeply involved in the outdoors that
Yeah,
way.
and just to, try to make it not too long-winded, Don, because I mean, I do like talking about this. And for a lot of people, I mean, our path connecting to the outdoors happens in many ways. I mentioned about my dad being an outdoors person, and I joke with people, but in the serious sense, my dad introduced my younger brother and I to fishing. My mom taught us how to catch fish. You know, so my mom and I oftentimes, would just go off on our own and fish for hours after I, learned how to fish. And my brother kind of connected with my dad, and they just like to talk a lot. You know,
Okay.
um, but as I mentioned, in terms of my professional path into this, I mean, my mom was a school teacher in Philadelphia Public School, taught fourth grade most of her career in that space, and then my dad was also an educator in the medical dental side of the fence. So I've had that education bug, but it really, Don, was my experience fishing up in Maine. My dad happened to be a longtime member of a very old sportsman's club. Actually, has been for many years the oldest African American sportsman's club in the country, Cambridge Gun and Rod, just based up in Maine. And it actually has an interesting story that I'm not going to bore the listeners here, but it actually was formed in 1893.
Oh.
Actually, the Cambridge name came from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and there actually was 11 white males and 11 black males, just so happened to have that, I guess, even number, odd number. And they vacationed and did some timbering up in Maine for the summer months, gathering firewood. Some of them built their own
Right.
furniture.
Yeah.
And so in the early 1900s, after that kind of first generation, the white members, just started to evolve into other activities. But the black members stayed. And if you can, recall, any of us can recall a little bit of history in that early 1900s, 20s, 30s, there weren't a lot of places for African Americans to go, particularly, in the areas of Maine where they were. So it evolved to an African American club. And now we're actually going back to diversifying to our founding. But when I got up there, and so this is probably 26 years ago or so, and I think the first night I was there, I heard this incredible sound. We just happened to be on the edge of a lake, and I'm going to play this sound if you can hear it. Can you hear that?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay, I'm actually playing a sound of a loon, which maybe we can add that into some
Mm.
background. But I was just totally moved, and I'm
Wow.
going to say shaken to my core to hear this spiritual sound. Some people call it a spooky sound or a scary sound, but I just fell in love with the loon. And as you've seen my business card, and I think even on my personal Facebook page, I'll flip back and forth in terms of images of a loon. But that really was my connection to the outdoors. And I remember coming back at mid late August after being up there for a few weeks over the years, and had this kind of feeling of just euphoria. I mean, just an incredible feeling being up there. And I would cross the Ben Franklin Bridge, and then I was kind of back to reality.
Mm.
And I said to my younger brother for many years, I said, we've got to do something to expose kids that look like us, that we know are in, a number of them in tough situations, or just not being able to experience what we did.
Yeah.
And that was really the seed, no pun intended, of starting Mid Atlantic Youth Anglers, and now 3 years ago we've kind of expanded our brand to Legacy Land and Water Partners, as we've gotten further into some land preservation work around fishing and wildlife habitats. And so, it was off to the races in 2008, and a little difficult story before that I may touch on.
Okay. All right. So, um, As you are introducing young people to the out of doors, I mean, it is a different place, particularly for the kids that you're talking about in the cities. It's like here's a big shift, I think. Yes?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a big shift. And so they have to know some things. And
absolutely.
we don't really teach people how to be in the out of doors. So, I'm wondering if there are some, basics, some basic rules of being in the out of doors that you could share with us, or that you share with the youth you work with.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, Don, probably the biggest factor is when we think about your, and again, yourself as a professor, and myself as, I go by my favorite kind of title, kind of lead coach for our Mid-Atlantic Youth Anglers and Outdoor Partners. But listening to some of your other podcasts, you were talking about some of the things that you do as a professor, and I think as we think about the outdoors, where do we teach people and young people, okay, about the rules and how to be in the outdoors? I mean, for any park that most of us go into, there's some sign somewhere of the rules. Some people see them, some people don't, some people
Mm,
read them, some people don't.
yeah.
But I think in preparing people to be in the outdoors, we don't. And I think by and large, most people are respectful when they're in nature, but sometimes they aren't. And when I talk with my colleagues who work in government, I oftentimes say to them, I remind them, I said, we don't teach people, the rules to be in the outdoors, whether or not it's loud noises or what have you. So it's just a reminder to that for those that are preparing to go into the outdoors. I mean, whether or not it's, being quiet and the quiet element. I mean, while people think it doesn't affect fishing, it does. I mean,
Mhm. Yeah.
water travels, further, excuse me, sound travels through water, faster than it does through ambient air. And so I tell people when they're out, with a group, whether or not it's family or friends, and they want to have a picnic or a barbecue and maybe next to water and they want to fish, I said, don't play loud music next to where people are fishing,
Mm,
because it could and probably will have an impact, but also in terms of just impacting others. So
yeah.
you're just understanding the rules of where those environments of where people are, whether or not it's a county park or a state park. I mean, I was on the C&D Canal, actually on Sunday biking, and started in Maryland and then crossed over into Delaware. And the rules were the same, but but there were rules. There were places that you were not supposed to go, and I just think it's important to just pay attention to that and respecting other people.
Yeah. So so some of the things I think that come up in my mind are like when you're introducing people who've not been in the out of doors, and maybe people who aren't traditionally seen in the out of doors, you know um when that's happening, are there barriers, are there problems that come up that you've seen, or that you sort of deal with?
Well, I think the biggest thing, and it's broad, Don. I mean, there's a couple of phrases that have been used increasingly over the last several years, and a lot of this coming, um, into COVID and out of COVID, of safe spaces.
Right.
And I try to broaden the safe spaces to not necessarily just people of color, but I think even for for women, for females that may be biking, jogging by themselves or in a small group.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think it's the fear factor that those of us that work in the outdoors, it's important to whether or not it's groups of students. I mean, I oftentimes, again, personally, when I'm out, I will, run into some people that may have been on a bike trail for the first time or coming into a park for the first time, and just trying to help people to understand and to get to places where they may need. I mean, some people, they don't know where the bathrooms are.
right.
Okay, so to me, I think it's the fear factor, Don, is probably the biggest aspect.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
the fear factor happens in a lot of ways. I mean, whether or not it's a new place that someone may go to, whether or not it's a family or a group, or whether or not it's an environment where there may be a lot of insects. I mean, this time of year, when we have the temperatures that we do, there are a lot of insects around. So will sometimes say to people, start out walking, along trails, where there may be meadows or fields where there may not necessarily be as many insects there as if you're walking through some wooded stretches and others. And also to be prepared for that. I mean, using, tick repellent in particular, but
Yeah.
just being prepared for those kinds of experiences that one is going to have at some point when you're in the outdoors is getting over the fear factor.
Yeah, and so being prepared helps with that, and yeah, so some of the basics that you're talking about how to dress and how to how to repel ticks,
Absolutely.
those kinds of things, and how to handle the sun as well. I mean, sort of that exposure is something that's of concern as well. So, being overheated, those kinds of things, when you're out. So yeah. So um I guess one of the other things that I think about is there are people who maybe are tasked with doing that are in our public spaces, helping to keep them safe in a way. But I sometimes wonder if that's entirely what they do, and if maybe they can't be a barrier as well.
Absolutely.
Somebody in a uniform comes by, and yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that I, work with our, local and state, governmental partners on as much as I can. And I remember a few years back, I was speaking at a national conference of some of our outdoor agencies, and one of the speakers made a kind of a comment that they were trying to survey, people that were coming into the park, and they were focused on the Hispanic community in particular. And the person said, "Well, we weren't able to get the kind of data that we wanted." And so I asked the question. I said, "Well, who was conducting the survey in the park?" And they said, "Well, our rangers were." And I said, "Well, how were they dressed?" And they said, they had their ranger uniforms on, I guess brown or green. And I said, "Well, that's where the star of the problem is, where unfortunately, with some of the immigration elements that we're dealing with in the media or just otherwise, a family or others that may be in a park and are approached by someone in a uniform, particularly if they've got a gun on in their holster,
yeah.
you may not necessarily get the reaction that you want." And those officers, again, I get questions from kids all the time. Why is that person over there, have a gun on their holster and basically kind of a vest? And I said, well, they're protecting our environments, and they're oftentimes in places where they may come across, one or more people, and there's no one else around, and those individuals may be conducting some activities that are illegal or not
Hmm.
what we want people to do. And so, they have to be prepared to defend themselves and then also to protect the public, as I mentioned, in terms of the safe spaces aspect. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and so that helps. I mean, that helps. I mean, we try to add that to every one of our introductory activities for youth as well as adults. I mean, we're finding probably more than 50% of our students, quote unquote, over the last 5 years have been adults.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so that I think that's a really important point, that they're there for our safety, and they're not on the other side. Yeah.
No, no, absolutely, absolutely. They're to help and protect.
Yeah. So I'm interested, maybe for the next, 10 minutes or so, to talk about what you teach in your organization, and about fishing, and maybe, for me as someone who does fish, and particularly is interested in the birds that come around water, that there seems to be this natural connection between birding and fishing. And
Absolutely.
maybe you can loop around to get to some birding stuff as well.
Well, starting out with my background and my love and fascination and obsession with loons, loons, mostly feed on fish, and so very quickly, those years ago and even now, when I see or in our training sessions, with both young students and older students, is particularly if we're on a larger body of water, if it's a river, say like the Delaware River, or it's a larger pond or lake, and there's different places that one could fish. I'll say, well, if you see where there may be birds congregating, whether or not they're ducks or whether or not they're herons, um, or if you happen to see some nests up in trees that are along the edges. I mean, those could be ospreys and eagles and others.
Yeah.
Those are indications that they're feeding. Those birds are feeding on fish that are in that area. I think for some people that have been down to, the our ocean side, our Atlantic City or New Jersey, shoreline or Delaware, and you'll see sometimes schools of seagulls that are they're over the water, and sometimes oftentimes we can see the fish that are kind of in schools that are kind of, some of them are jumping at the top because there's probably some predator fish that are underneath trying
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
catch them. I mean, so a good visual of where there may be birds, okay, in places where there are fish, because oftentimes, I mean, we say that we call it fishing, not catching. So there are days and times that we are out fishing and we catch nothing, and or I catch nothing. But immersing ourselves in birds and the other wildlife aspect, one can be helpful, as I mentioned, to identifying where fish may be, but just the beauty. I mean, when I'm up in Maine, which is Maine is one of the states where we have, in particular, our northern New England states, we have some in Pennsylvania, but not in our immediate area here in terms of numbers. But I'll sometimes go out and fish, and I'll put my rod down, and I'll just watch these birds. And if I get close enough to them, I'll bring my camera out or my binoculars out. And I felt when I picked my rod back up, I felt like I just caught a lot of fish because of the experience that I had just looking at
Hmm.
these loons. So
Yeah.
very immersive nature opportunity around pretty much any body of water, pond, stream, creek, lake, whatever it may be. There are going to be bird species around our bodies of water.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to be able to figure out what they're doing if we slow down, if we stop
Absolutely.
and observe. Yeah. Yeah. So then the fishing part, you're teaching people to fish. And so I'm wondering how you start because, I mean, here we are in this podcast sort of encouraging people to be in the out of doors, to maybe go fishing, to go birding. How do you start people out?
Well, we do a lot of public events right now, Don. So, and that's one of the factors of why we have so many adults that we're working with. One, the technical aspect of having an adult to sign a waiver for their kids, but oftentimes with the adults that are coming out, they're either coming out by themselves or in a small group. But is again to the fear factor. I think it's why we've been relatively successful with some of the numbers that we have because we reduce the fear factor and we're meeting people where they are. One, asking them a lot of questions. Have they fished before? Have they not fished before? And if they have, did they catch anything? And what kind of equipment, as opposed to just jumping in and assuming that someone either knows or doesn't know. And then we take them through the basics. I mean, I know in one of your previous podcasts, Jim Neary, who's a friend and a great resource everywhere he goes, talked about that bobber, okay, and which is what we start with,
Yeah. Okay.
and we start with it one because as I say to people, the bobber serves a couple purposes. One, you can see where your line is in the water, and then you can see the activity of a fish engaging what you may be fishing, with in terms of bait. Um, and then, it just gives that visual, and it also, particularly on an unknown body of water, it keeps a line from getting tangled, at the bottom, and so it suspends
Mm,
that bait, whatever
right.
height that the bobber is. So we teach people those basics, and what we try to focus on is teaching people how to not get in trouble with their equipment, with what they're using. We oftentimes start out and have been actually in use for the 16 years what we call the closed-faced spin cast rod and wheel combos, which the line is enclosed as opposed to the open face with the line or the spinning reel,
Right.
because it keeps people from getting tangled. Because oftentimes when someone goes into a store or even online, you don't really know what to buy.
Right.
So
Yeah.
our a lot of our training sessions, particularly during our winter months and when we're indoors, is teaching kind of a what to buy is kind of our training sessions. When you're going into a store, if you're purchasing online, what do you choose from?
Mm,
And then, again, we're teaching people to not just the experience that they're having where we are at that particular body of water, but we're teaching them some of the fundamentals of when they're at a different body of water. And so we may be at a pond, and so we're teaching people, how to read, okay, that body of water and where the fish may be. A lot of times it's around structure, the edges. So getting people to understand those aspects of what they may see there, but also what they may see when they go to another body of water. Um, and such as the height or length of a rod. I mean, other than a small child that can't necessarily handle a very tall rod, the height or length of the rod is based upon the body of water that one is fishing and how far they want to cast. And so fishing in a bigger, river or lake and, wanting to cast out further or needing to cast out further, the height of the rod is going to be, a little bit taller than a rod that may be smaller, where if you're fishing in a stream in a creek, you're not casting that far and you're needing something, or it's a little bit better to have something that's shorter. So you're not getting, casting, around trees and
yeah.
vegetation. So again, we're trying to get people to understand what they're experiencing there at that body of water, but also the transferable aspects when they're fishing another body of water.
Yeah. Mm, okay. And so I want to be specific for a little bit and say we've been sort of talking about Chester County, and I'm wondering about places to go to get started.
Well, one of the places to go is, I mean, obviously Googling our Mid-Atlantic Youth Anglers or my name, you can
There you
find
go.
us where we are. But I mean, and we are in multiple states, Don. Now, I mean, we're in Philadelphia every week. We partner and work with a number of great organizations in Philadelphia that host weekly sessions. I mean, probably every week we have people coming from 3 or 4 states,
Wow.
because there aren't a lot of places to go to show up somewhere where somebody can teach you. I mean, the
Right.
Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission has a number of family fishing events that happen. So, checking their website for where they may be in the region. I know they've got an event, I think, coming up in Chester, I believe, the weekend of August 10th. I mean, we're rotating between 2 locations in Philadelphia every Thursday, and even a weekly session that we do there. We have some activities that we're doing here in Chester County at Anson B. Nixon Lake in Kennett Square.
Hmm.
And we're actually going to be scheduling some more in the fall, for the fall as the temperatures get a little
Oh,
bit.
great. Okay.
So the one great thing about Chester County here is we have a number of great bodies of water that are all throughout the region. I mean, the cost of a Delaware fishing license is the same, I believe, for a non-resident is the same as it is for a residential license in here in Pennsylvania. So some great resources to
Hmm.
take advantage of in some of our neighboring states.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so how could somebody find your schedule? Put
So
that.
we post our schedule on our Mid-Atlantic Youth Anglers and Outdoors Partners, and we do that on Facebook. one of our partner organizations, I mentioned Riverfront North Partnership. If you Google their name, you'll see, where those locations will be. Bartram's Gardens in Philadelphia, which we have a little bit of a pause right now with some environmental activities that they're doing down there. But we're oftentimes posting there. And then the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission's website has a number of different events, happening throughout the region.
Okay, cool. So we will put that in our notes to this show on Spotify and post it on our resources on the Learning Life Skills Together website. And so when we come sort of towards the end of meeting here, I like to ask our guest if they have something like some words of wisdom or a watchword for us to sort of take away and ponder. Wondering if you have something like that, not to put you on the spot, but
Well, the words, Don, that come to me often is nature's healing power. As I touched on a couple of times, with fishing in particular, I mean, we've integrated birding with fishing, and birding exists with fishing, pretty much everywhere where everyone's fishing.
yeah.
Um, but it's that healing power. I mean, I was, thinking before I jumped on here today, some of the experiences we've had over the last, week or two in particular, and it amazes me that we have the number of people that follow us around to our fishing events, and some people have already bought equipment, and so they're coming to join these sessions because of some of the social experiences with the same
Yeah.
people. Um, and then there's some people that will ask the question, and some of them have followed us for 3, 4, 5 years, and I'll ask them, have they bought anything yet? And they say, no, Todd, I haven't. And I'll say, well, why? They say, well, we just want to do it with you and the group that you're with.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes, oftentimes, again, we can't control, when someone catches fish, but they just love that experience of being out in nature, with people that they're familiar with, and
Yeah.
always teaching and learning and sharing. I mean, we learn from people all the time. I mean, I'm a fishing, birding, and wildlife trainer, but I'm constantly learning. And if I'm not asking questions about people's experiences and where they went, then I'm not learning. So, but it's nature's healing power is what my words of my watchwords are.
Yeah. So get outside, get outdoors. And it sounds like from what you're describing, be with others. I mean, there's part of that healing power is that it makes us more open to others, or it can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, I think the healing power of nature, whether or not someone's by themselves, I mean, you started out by in terms of just that quiet moment. I mean, we think about what people do when they're at their break, during the day at work, or I think even your students
Uh,
at school, they're getting out of those environments, and sometimes they're going outside, or sometimes they're going to a library, but being able to get out in some form of nature. I mean, even indoors. I mean, we do some, indoor floriculture. We integrate into some of our activities as well in terms of
mm,
plants and flowers and other things that, are green and have color to them.
yeah. Yeah. All of that is to the good,
Yeah.
definitely,
Nature wellness.
and to healing. Perfect. So thank you for that, the healing power of nature. We'll remember it. And it was a joy to have you on.
Thank you for the invitation, Don. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to do this and share this with you and the audience.